Wanted to invite you or thank you for joining us today, certainly as PCA drives forward our conversation around sports battling racism and the new initiative that we have. One of the goals that we have with respect to that initiative is PCA trying to serve as a thought leader and as a conduit to drive forward conversations like today. We know that, lots of different people are having lots of different conversations, and we feel like collectively, if we're having the same conversation or connected to our conversations, we're going to be able to battle racism a lot more effectively and a lot more efficiently, and knowing that we're not having to do it by ourselves. So again, we welcome you here. Obviously, by way of you being here, you're interested in the topic. You're interested in being an ally or a soldier in this fight, and so we need you here. We need you to come in with an open mind, knowing that there's going to be some things that you learn that you didn't know, but that doesn't happen unless you're willing to kind of open your ears and your mind, and that goes for myself, starting with me. So as part of this conversation, I want to kick it to my colleague, Joe Tarasi, who's going to serve as our producer for this hour that we're going to spend together. Joe?
Thank you, Trennis. Nice to see everybody. Nice to see all my friends and friends I've yet to meet. So welcome, as Trennis said. I'm going to give you a quick rundown on how we're going to run this call, run this meeting. It's a little different than what you've probably done with us. But it's actually much easier. So give me one moment. I'm going to share my screen. And for this meeting, for the most part, you are going to leave your microphone muted, if you please. I can mute them for you if need be, but for the most part, you can do it yourself. And I will be taking questions for the panelists. So you can send me your questions via the chat box. So you'll click chat from your menu here in Zoom or from your mobile device, and send me a text message with your question, and I will do my very best to get as many of them to the panelists through your moderator, Marty Reed, as possible. That's really it. I hope you enjoy yourselves. We're happy you're here, and welcome. I hand it off right now, right back to Trennis.
Thank you, Joe. And certainly we will be, as he mentioned about the chat box, we will be adding resources into that chat box at the end of our conversation. So please know that you can reference that at the end, but we won't be doing that during the conversations, just so we can keep everybody kind of here present with us. So to not belabor the fact or to delay in any way, I wanted to introduce our three panelists, of which we're very, very proud to be in partnership with and thankful that they've taken some time to spend with us today. Alphabetically, want to start initially with Megan Bartlett, who is the founder of We Coach. We Coach serves as a very needed resource for PCA. She has spent most of her career working in designing, advocating for programs that use sports to promote youth development and positivity in communities. She serves as one of PCA's National Advisory Board members. And certainly, like I mentioned before, serves as one of PCA's trusted resources. She is an amazing speaker. She does a great job of really protecting the kids that she serves, especially around trauma-informed coaching. And welcome, Megan. We appreciate you being here. She is currently in Maine visiting her family, so that's where you see her. So she's committed to the cause, that she's willing to do it from her car. So appreciate it.
I'm not driving.
Moving on to Andrew McIntosh. Andrew serves as the VP of Curriculum for Rise. Rise, obviously, he serves in supporting the design, delivery, and evaluation of the curriculum and educational resources that they have there. Rise also serves as one of PCA's trusted resources, and we really thank Andrew for being here. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, sir. And last but certainly not least, want to welcome Mrs. Nicole Whiteman, who serves as the CEO of the LA Dodgers Foundation. And I will give her the opportunity to share the story, but they recently were celebrated during ESPN's ESPY Awards, receiving the Sports Humanitarian Team of the Year recognition. and something that they have rightfully earned probably several times. But this year they are being celebrated, and Nicole heads up that work, and we really are grateful for the work you do and you being here today, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in light of that, I'm going to be quiet so you can hear from these people, but I want to kick it to my colleague, Marty Reed, who will be facilitating the conversation. Marty?
Thank you so much, Trinus. I'm really excited for today's conversation. Thank you all for tuning in. As Positive Coaching Alliance National Partnerships and Marketing Manager, I have the pleasure of moderating today's conversation. So I'd love to just start off with everyone giving a brief update on your organization and the work that you're doing, what you've been up to, so everyone can understand how it relates to today's topic. We can start with Megan, we'll go with Andrew, then Nicole. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty, and thanks to the whole PCA team for having me. It's a real honor to be on a panel with Nicole and Andrew. Just to give you an update on what WeCoach has been doing, as Trennis mentioned, our work primarily focuses on the intersection of sport and trauma, and how sport can be a uniquely powerful tool in helping young people heal. And so I believe that in this moment we are particularly in need of that. And so we've been working on how do we get that education to as many coaches as possible. And you'll see a couple of new initiatives coming out from us over the next couple of months, including a really, really deep dive for leaders in the community who want to be able to come back and train their own communities to understand the impact of trauma and the way that sport can be used as a teaching and healing tool. So we're moving our trauma work forward. The Dr. Bruce Perry and the Neurosequential Network, and I'll talk more about that later, but we're super excited to be here and hope that if we can add anything to the conversation, it's how powerful sport is as a tool to heal, and how much healing has to be done in order for us to really address the systemic oppression and racism that's prevalent in our country.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you again for inviting us to be a part of this conversation. I'm really excited to share more about our work at RISE and what we do. I think it's always good for us to have more of these conversations about race and racism, and certainly the way in which sport can be a vehicle to help us alleviate some of these challenges in our society. RISE specifically is a nonprofit that educates and empowers the sport community to eliminate racial discrimination. So, we do address social justice issues more broadly, but very specifically, we are focused on racism and how we can eliminate it, ideally, through the vehicle of sport. So, a lot of our work is around education and programming. We work with stakeholders and partners from the middle school ages all the way up to the professional leagues to do that. We have curriculum that we've developed that we facilitated in person, and then at the start of the year, we've pivoted relatively quickly into the digital space. So I think one of the resources that I want to make sure people can take a look at is our digital learning series, because that is a great resource and tool for those who want to have more of these conversations. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you again for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Hi, everyone. Nicole Whiteman, as mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Los Angeles Dodgers Foundation. And our mission truly is to tackle some of Los Angeles's most pressing problems, specifically in the areas of homelessness, education, healthcare, youth development, and social justice. Our vision is that every Angelino, regardless of neighborhood or zip code, has the opportunity to thrive. And so we focus our work in some of the most challenged neighborhoods throughout LA. And we obviously use the hook of sport, specifically baseball and softball, in a lot of the work that we do. Through a social justice lens, we actually run and fund all of our programs. And so we are typically on the ground aiming to approach and sort of attack the challenges that those who need it most are facing during any given time. And obviously here in Los Angeles, as I'm sure in most of your cities, it is the Black and brown communities And obviously over the last couple of weeks and months, I should say, starting with the pandemic that has hit us all, Black and brown communities have experienced a crisis on top of a crisis. Things already existed. And so we at the Dodgers Foundation know that the crisis existed, and the pandemic has exacerbated the crisis, and we're here to continue to do that work. So we've adapted similarly a lot of virtual programming for our participants, our youth, and our families. And also within the last couple of weeks, we've been very intentional about, I would say, re-examining the work that we do in the social justice space, but also making sure that we're making social justice resources available to our partners, our funders, our youth and families, frankly, inside the club, in terms of staff, players, training staff, et cetera, to make sure that we can be as helpful in contributing to the conversations that have started as a result of events over the last couple of weeks.
Great. Thank you all for that introduction. And it's clear that we have a powerhouse panel here, and I'm really excited about diving into this conversation. Everyone on this call today, we do have something in common, whether that be a coach, a parent, athlete, administrator, working in the sports industry. We all are involved in sports, and we can't deny, that sports can be a powerful tool for promoting social cohesion and important values like fair play, mutual respect, and tolerance for others. But, on one hand, we have this huge opportunity to use sports as a vehicle to battle racism, but we also have some challenges, regarding race and that impact sports. So can we start there and talk about what are the biggest challenges or issues regarding race that have an impact on youth sports that we all must take into consideration? Would you like to start? How about Dr. McIntosh? Would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think there are a number of them, so I'll touch on a couple. I think one of the biggest ones that we've seen is the intersection, the overlap, intersectionality with race and socioeconomic status, especially in the United States. And so access to sport and access to quality programming, access to equipment, resources, I think has been a challenge, so that Black and brown communities, lower socioeconomic class communities have struggled to have the same types of programming. And as programming has shifted out of the public high school space and moved into charter schools, private education, clubs, etc., access isn't the same. And so, whether it be the more mainstream types of sports, football, baseball, basketball, or the other sports that many in those communities, Black and brown communities, feel like, they don't have a part of, they don't play as much because they don't have that ready access or they can't afford. So things like, lacrosse, tennis, swimming, even soccer in some instances, I think access is a big one. The second one, and again, there are several, so I'll just give one more and then I'll pass it on to Megan and Nicole, is I think the myth of athleticism. So, simultaneously as you have access being an issue, and being determinated or differentiated along the lines of race, you also then have many within the Black community feeling as though sport is their only way out and they have to be athletes. And when you think about sport in the US being a $60 billion a year industry, being an athlete and being a professional athlete is not the only career opportunity. Yet, there are many echelons within sport where we do not see, and youth sport where we do not see many minorities, as coaches, presidents, CEOs of organizations, etc. So I think, the two big ones in my mind to tackle are access more broadly, but access not just on the playing field, but access to other spaces within sport. So I'll pause there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely say that in kind of continuing the access theme is that sports is supposed to be the great equalizer. So we all think about movies like Remember the Titans that promote the idea that sports brings everyone together and offers this sort of upward path to social mobility and so much opportunity, whether it be for college or the pros, et cetera. But I think that it's not that simple. And one of the biggest issues to Dr. McIntosh's comments is the access part, is that the widening gap for me in particular in access to youth sports in particular, which is, you know, a segment of that 60 billion overall sports number that you mentioned, is probably the biggest challenge. When we think about proximity to wealth right now determines a child's access to academic, social, and recreational resources, right? So if we are not looking at the fact that people of color continue to struggle, whether we're accessing education or any other general community resources, which essentially means we're continuing to struggle as it relates to sports resources, we have to understand that it plays a huge factor in measuring, you know, where we stand with youth sports, what access we have to youth sports. If you can't afford the equipment, if you can't afford the entrance fees, if you can't afford all of those things, you just can't play. I think the access thing also goes to, what's the right way to say this, sort of maybe family structure. So the stigma of daddy ball, I think, plays a really big role in the fact that youth sports, in some communities, it's a pipeline, right? So if I use LA as an example, in Beverly Hills, you start to play sports really young, you play all sports, you're a major part of sports, no matter how good or bad you are on the team, et cetera. Kids in, you know, what would be considered the hood, you need to be a standout to be seen, you experience challenges, you may not have access because of costs, because you don't have the right equipment, you have to go overboard to do certain things, and then even in those communities, you know, the player who is the standout is the one that everybody knows and experiences, et cetera. The access part to me is the ultimate challenge, the biggest challenge. And I think that we perpetuate this idea that sports brings everyone together, when in fact, with specifically speaking to youth sports, that is not the case.
Right. Anything else to add with that, Megan?
Yeah, I think, you know, Dr. McIntosh and Nicole did a great job of summarizing some of the issues that we see with access for sure. One thing that I would just sort of add as an additional challenge in this space is, I think, coach education and understanding what coaches need to know in order to be effective at working with young people, and making sure that coaches working with young people across the spectrum of, to Dr. McIntosh's point, socioeconomic status and race is incredibly important. It's why we advocate so strongly that coaches understand the development of the brain and the way that stress acts on the brain, because when you do, you can understand why a young person may behave the way they do. And when you can start to understand why a young person behaves the way they do, you can make more allowances for that behavior if you understand the stress that, you know, they may be under outside of their experience with you. And so I think one of the challenges with coaches in sort of traditional models is that many coaches operate in the sort of it's my way or the highway model. And when you really understand the impact of racism, of institutional oppression, of watching George Floyd be murdered on television, and what that does to a young person, particularly a young Black person, and how that may affect the way they show up at your practice, it's essential that coaches understand that, or else we will have coaches who can't provide the right environment for kids and will either force a kid out of that experience or the kid will leave that experience. And so I think making sure coaches are educated to understand that goes a long way in providing the kinds of environments that kids want to be in and where kids can interact more positively with each other.
That's great. And I'm so happy that you said that. That's very powerful. I think a lot of people on this call, a lot of coaches out there, they want to do better. They want to be better. What are some of those common misconceptions that coaches make when addressing these challenges? Can you speak to some of the misconceptions that coaches make?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I think that the biggest misconception behind all of that sits behind all of this and what you start to understand when you start to understand the brain is that a lot of reactions that young people have are not within their own control, right? They are not consciously trying to be a jerk that day. They are not, their behavior is not directed at the coach. Their behavior is created by a set of circumstances that are acting on them, and a biological reaction to those circumstances. And so when you can relieve this pressure of thinking a young person is acting out against you and understand what is behind a young person's behavior, then it doesn't become coach versus kid. It becomes coach and kid working together to build the skills that a young person needs. And if coaches, and I'm speaking, particular in this case about white coaches, if white coaches don't spend the time, do the work to understand what the impact of racism is on young Black kids, young Black youth around the country, then there will always inherently be a disconnect between that coach and those kids. Because particularly right now, with all the images that kids are seeing, with all of the ways in which they're being exposed to these systems of oppression, white coaches need to be able to sit with the discomfort of that work and say, I need to understand more about your experience and not just make assumptions about why you're doing what you're doing.
That's so good.
Yeah, if I could piggyback on that, I also feel like, and I'm glad Megan, specifically gave some tips for white coaches. I think that white coaches also have to understand that every Black kid has a different experience. And so every Black kid on the team, it isn't a create a special circumstance or approach this child differently if he comes from Compton or Watts or some other, neighborhood that is considered low income or underserved. But that Black kid who is on the team in the Valley or Beverly Hills or wherever it is, he may need that same treatment, right? So the Black experience is the Black experience. And a lot of the children who are of middle or high income status who are on teams with a white coach and predominantly all white players, they too are facing situations where the coach doesn't understand. So I think the coach being less about a blanket approach and being more about, hey, each player on my team comes with a different experience, white, Black, whatever race they might be. And how can I collectively serve the team and essentially nurture the players as individuals, right? So look at them as individuals. So if there is a Black player who is of this economic status, or a Black player of this economic status, or a Black player from this neighborhood or otherwise, how do you understand each player's unique set of talents and unique set of struggles? And struggles couldn't be economic, struggles can be mental, struggles can be a whole lot of things that I think a lot of coaches have to be aware of. It's that idea of not coming with preconceived notions of who the team is or preconceived notions of who the individual players are based on the way they look, right? So it's about really looking at that for me, the popular misconception that we're a team, everyone's great, everyone's here, we're all fine. Maybe he has this experience because he's this color, or he has this economic thing, or whatever. But I think coaches really do have to challenge themselves to not have a blanket approach.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Really important point. Something else I think to consider as well is, coaching is like a power structure, right? So as a coach, you have power, and you send there to instruct. And a lot of times these conversations are about listening. A lot of times they are about what are people experiencing and feeling. So if you think about the youth that you have in your charge, in your care, what are their thoughts? What are their ideas around what's going on? What are their experiences? And so I think oftentimes one of the big misconceptions is, one, coaches aren't willing to listen because that isn't the way sport is set up. That isn't my role as a coach. My role is not to listen. I am the expert. So that's one group. I think the other piece is, I don't know about this space. And I think that is especially the case sometimes for a lot of white coaches. I don't know about race. I don't know about racism. I don't know about diversity and inclusion more broadly. So, I would love to talk about it, but I'm not going to talk about it if it's going to make me look stupid. If I'm going to turn out to be a fool because I don't know. What if Andrew asked me this question, and I don't know how to respond? And so I think part of this too is also about ceding some power and having some faith in the ability and the potential of your youth to have these conversations in a mature and an insightful manner, because my experience has been that they absolutely know a lot more about this space and certainly about their own experiences than many coaches do.
Yes, I appreciate these thoughtful responses. Definitely leveraging the youth to really use their voices in this conversation. Next question that we're talking about here is how to bridge the gap between programs, sport and coaching programs with social justice issues. How do we continue to bridge this gap?
Yeah, so I think, going back to Nicole's original point, we sometimes see sport as this really great space that brings everybody together and so in and of itself solves problems. But just as I think that everyone can think of a really great experience that they might have had in sport, I think simultaneously people can also think of bad experiences that they've had in sport. And so I know a lot of the work that Megan has done, because I've followed Megan's work for a couple of years, it is around identifying what are best practices in sport for coaches and others, and identifying what are those things that are not so good, what creates less optimal experiences for youth and others. And so that for me is a real big first step, an acceptance and a recognition that sport in and of itself is not this great thing. We can absolutely make it great. I think it can be truly wonderful. I have had a ton of wonderful sporting experiences, but we have to be, using again one of Nicole's words, very, very intentional in doing that. What are the elements, the best practices, the people, the relationships we want to forge within it? And only if we do that, I think then we can truly unlock the full potential that it has.
I would say that, sports most certainly has the ability to influence change. And maybe one of the first places to start is reinforcing the teamwork concept. So the idea that working towards a collective goal means that we're supporting and we're standing for all of our teammates. So if we see sports as sort of this microcosm for life and you work together so everybody succeeds, if everybody does well, we all win. That means every single individual that's part of that team has to be taken into account, has to be accounted for, has to be part of the overall narrative, has to have a role. I think the common goal is equality. The common goal on a team is equality. The common goal for all of us that we're trying to, get to in this world right now is equality. So if we work together on a team, we can help to come up with a successful win. If we work together beyond a team, just using sport again as a microcosm for life, wow, look what we might be able to do along the lines of racism. I think our kids are watching us and they're counting on us. And I think it's important for them to see coaches as educators and teachers the same way they see their parents and other folks in life, teachers in the classroom, et cetera, in that role. So kind of, again, going back to sort of taking out the coach is sort of the control power structure, and the good team, the good athletes are sort of in control and everybody sits back. It's about reinforcing that teamwork.
That's great. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because, we all know that it's not just coaches that have huge influence on, this whole spectrum. There's also parents as well. Can we speak to some ways that parents can play a positive role in, really making changes in the future? What can they do at home to really impact change in the future?
Wow, it's been hard to be a parent the last couple of weeks. Really hard. I have two boys who are 17 and 11, and I think that we most definitely play a positive role in how we're going to improve race relations in our households with other people's children, et cetera. But I think over the last few weeks, the term that I've been most concerned about when I hear people say is, I don't see color. We all have to see color and we have to see differences, and that's a huge part of why we're here today. A more effective statement might be, I don't judge people based on color or differences. And so My children have been in very diverse situations, and the conversation I've had to have with them is it's not that you don't see color, it's that you don't judge based on color. You allow people to be who they are and you accept their differences. I think that parents have to have honest conversations about America's history. Black people were enslaved for hundreds of years, and a lot of children in a lot of households, frankly, a lot of adults, don't know that. And they don't know the details behind that, and they don't know how much that has had an impact on Black people's mental, physical, emotional, economic status, that a lot of the disparities that the Black community faces are a result of being enslaved for 401 years. I think that when we think about the tumultuous times that we're in right now, we got to destroy the myths behind there not being issues with our criminal justice system. We have to destroy the myths behind where Black Americans have contributed to various aspects of the community that a lot of our children are experiencing, right? So I think when we're speaking to our children, the story should be one of truth based on age, because the reality is everybody is talking about, how do I talk to a 3-year-old versus how do I talk to an 11-year-old? Even how I talk to my 17-year-old, my 11-year-old has to be different. But I think we have to be very honest and transparent and true to the fact that America is a country that, while we're great, we've made a lot of mistakes, and we should tell our kids that so that they can do better than us. Because what's happening now is that as adults, we have been part of a truly a great nation that has not accepted that we've made a lot of mistakes, and not accepted the fact that there were never any real solutions put in place around equality for the Black community. And so hence, this is how we're reacting to the murder of George Floyd and so many others. So I think education beyond what's learned in school and implementing actual examples for children, implementing literature. I think one of the best things that we've done at the Dodgers Foundation the last couple of weeks is put out our social justice resources. So what are some good books that parents, especially parents who are not in Black households, can actually be reading to and sharing with their children? What are good films that they can watch together as a family and break down? And frankly, right now, it's everywhere, right? So participate in conversation, start the conversation, be uncomfortable, have the conversation with other white families and other Black families, so that you're talking about examples and you're giving your children a space to say, I don't know, or I do know, or tell me more about this, mom, or I want to learn more about this, mom. I think it's just really important right now. It's education, and education beyond the classroom.
Yeah, I'd echo that as well. I would say be vulnerable and be willing to have these conversations. It's tough sometimes. You know, I've been in several conversations over the last couple of weeks where, you know, a lot of people kind of say, hey, but they're only 5 and they're only 4, and they don't see color when they're that age, etc. And, you know, we have a responsibility as parents to educate our kids, not just in terms of the things we say and what we give them access to, but also the example that we set. And part of that example is our vulnerability ourselves to have tough, difficult, messy conversations. There's no easy answer, I think, to a lot of the questions being asked of our society right now. And we need to let our kids understand that it's okay to lean in to that messiness, lean into that discomfort, and try to figure things out. I mean, that's all we can ask of ourselves and one another. And that's what we need to teach. I think the zeal to get the quick, clean answer and response is what has allowed us to perpetuate systemic racism for so long, and discrimination of many types, because it's just quicker and cleaner and easier to just sweep it under the rug or sweep it behind the carpet. To truly unpack it and figure it out, and come up with a solution that works for everybody or works for most people, it's tough to do. But that is the example that we need to set if we're not going to perpetuate this for another generation.
Yeah, and I would add one thing about both Nicole and Dr. McIntosh mentioned this earlier. I think the idea that sport can be this great equalizer, right? But we have to be intentional in order to get there. I think if to talk a little bit more about the brain, if you understand about the brain, you understand that the brain reacts to novelty, right? And so stress is caused by things that are new. And so what we need to have what we need parents to understand, and all adults to understand, is that they actually have to seek out environments where young people are treated the same, where that promise of equality that Nicole was talking about is the environment, right? They have to put their money where their mouth is and look for the coaches who create those environments. They have to actively push against systems to make sure that it isn't an all-white team because they're the ones who had the resources to get the kids to the field, 25 minutes away or whatever those barriers are. And so because access is an issue, we need parents to actively look for environments where coaches can share that power, where coaches are listening to their players, where coaches are creating environments where all kids feel valued and safe. And when we have those environments, if sport really does create opportunities for kids to be exposed to other kids who are different than them in all the myriad ways they can be different, then we stop reacting with stress to people who have difference, right? If we're not exposed to kids who are different than us, then when we're exposed to kids who are different than us or people who are different than us, our stress response goes on, right? Yes. But the more often we are exposed to those differences, the less likely our stress response is to go off, right? And the more we get accustomed to being with those people, and that sort of dysregulation, that stress response can get in the way of so many productive interactions because it's uncertain, it's unsure. And so we have to seek out those environments so that our kids have the opportunity for being in a room with the people who all look different and all come from different circumstances and all have different things to add to the mix is valued.
Yes, absolutely. Environments, social circles, they all can have a substantial impact on identity development and perspectives. Being a part of a diverse group of friends with their own experiences and opinions prepares children to deal with individuals and get to know individuals who are not like them. So I really appreciate those perspectives that you're sharing with all of us. So I wanted to ask Nicole, with such a well-known brand as the Dodgers, in the Dodger way, how do you go about using the platform to make a difference? And how do you, as a leader of culture, make sure that your staff is also reflecting the character and culture that you wish to see?
Yeah. So the Dodger brand yields global recognition, which means that our messages have a profound impact with tremendous reach. And we leverage the world's love for baseball, the love for the team, and our mission to improve the communities that we serve. And obviously baseball is America's, favorite pastime, and we want to keep the fun in sports. However, as responsible citizens, we boldly use this fund to spread a message of hope and change. And so the work of the Dodgers Foundation is to use the brand, perpetuate the brand, to say, yes, the game is important, but the game is also important for the health and well-being of our fellow citizens. And essentially that should be our top priority, right? The game should bring us all together when we can all get together again, right? To draw crowds and capitalize on people's genuine love for sports and all of that. But we want them to have this great time at the game, but we also want them to know that it's bigger than baseball. Our, ultimate goal is to say, beyond baseball, there are people who are struggling, and the true win doesn't come in building communities if we're not equally protected under the law, and where success is not determined simply by where we live. And so it goes back to the vision that I talked about in my introduction, where everyone, regardless of neighborhood or zip code, has the opportunity to thrive, is the way that we are putting ourselves forth as a team. It's the character and the culture that we wish to see.
Nice. Absolutely. And I think that's so important as we move forward, and we want to see that change. And you guys are doing a great job leading the way there. It's bigger than baseball. And we love working with you. I wanted to ask Andrew, if you can give us some perspective on this question from the audience. They said, as a white athletic director working at a predominantly white school, how can I not navigate through the discussion of social injustice and racism to the student, athletes, and parents? What tools would you suggest I use to help my students understand that the world we live in is not necessarily the real world when it comes to social justice and equality?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we've seen and understood is that there need to be some skills developed as you approach this work. So, a lot of it comes, first of all, with education, knowing the facts, knowing the history of the country, sometimes a history that is not covered in the textbooks or any classroom. But more broadly and more importantly, I think it boils down to things like perspective taking, the things like listening, the things like empathy, because those are the things that allow you to understand what people's circumstances might be, and to gauge, based on that, what an appropriate response might be. So I think, at its simplest, at its root, it is about developing those skills. How are you prioritizing conversations about social justice? How are you prioritizing conversations about racism? I know a number of places, as I indicated to or alluded to before, where some coaches don't want to have those discussions because they think broadly it might be a distraction to their team or to the school, or it might be politically charged or might become politically charged. But so first, an acceptance that, hey, we need to have these conversations. They are important. It is possible to have them in productive and positive ways. And secondly, it is about developing those skills, developing them yourself, and then also developing them in your student athletes, your teachers, your staff, and the parents. Because ultimately, those are the skills that are going to allow us to build society. I think sport can help us to build those skills because teams work towards common goals, etc. There's that camaraderie. But it does take, I think, a huge deal for us to say, hey, we're willing to have these discussions, to learn, to read, to understand better.
That's so good. I recently watched one of the really powerful sports movies, Invictus, about the Nelson Mandela story, how he united South Africa when they played against New Zealand. And one of the quotes that stood out to me was, if I cannot change when circumstances demand it, how can I expect others to? So it definitely has to start with us, everyone here on this call today, looking inwardly, right, and making those changes and seeing where they are so we can understand where we need to go in the future, because it is all on us to make these changes now. I would love to add on or ask Megan to share a bit more from a trauma-informed perspective, thinking about us returning back into sports, returning back to play. What are some things that coaches have to keep in mind, when we get back out there with our athletes and all the things that they've been going through over the past, past month or two. So what are some of the things that coaches have to keep in mind from a trauma-informed perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Marty. I think it boils down to really that a dysregulated adult can't regulate a dysregulated child. And trauma is the experience of overwhelming stress, and stress dysregulates us in our bodies and in our brains, and in our behavior. We are not at our best when we are overwhelmed by stress. And we've all experienced this over the last 2 months, over the last 4 or 5 months with COVID-19 and the murder of George Floyd. So kids will show up having experienced this stress, and they will likely be in some ways dysregulated by it. Sport has the power to help kids regulate, which is one of the most powerful pieces, I think, of sport. One of the most sort of underutilized pieces of sport when it comes to healing is that patterned, repetitive, rhythmic experiences help us regulate. It helps us calm our stress response in a way that actually opens the brain up for learning, that in a way that actually allows us to not overreact to stressful situations. And so kids are going to show up dysregulated. And if we're intentional, we can use sport to help them get back to regulation, but only if we can manage our own. only if we can be regulated in the face of their dysregulation. So we have to take care of ourselves before we can do anything to help them as they return. And I think that's a huge piece of being able to do all the things Andrew said, right? Being able to listen, being able to have empathy, being able to take someone's perspective is really, really hard when you're dysregulated, when you feel too stressed out by those conversations, when you feel stressed out by being vulnerable, when being vulnerable is such a new experience for you that it makes you so uncomfortable that you choose not to do it anymore. And so what we have to do is really get comfortable with that discomfort and use the strategies to regulate ourselves, right? Use physical activity, use relationships, use the need for some control and routine and consistency and structure to make sure that we're showing up as our best selves so that we can help young people do the same.
So good. Absolutely. I feel like I'm ready to do some jumping jacks and get my regulation down. A little blunder earlier. I mean, so thank you so much for providing that advice. I'd love for everyone to share maybe 2 or 3 just tangible action steps that a coach or a parent or maybe an administrator can implement right away moving forward after these. I mean, I've been taking notes throughout this conversation as well. I know everyone else on this webinar is doing the same, but what are some, action steps, tangible action steps that we can do moving forward from here?
Yeah,
I'll
go ahead.
I'll chime in just to say, I think that conversation starting is one of the most important things that have happened over the last couple of weeks. And I know that a lot of teams cannot gather at this point, but the opportunity to just jump on a Zoom with all of your players or FaceTime or however people are communicating, and just say to your players, how are you feeling? And allow people the space to express thoughts, to express their unknown, to just say, I don't know, to say, I have no idea what's going on, to say I'm totally just ruptured by what is happening, to say I'm not feeling well about what's going on. I think that kids in particular need the space, and that coaches shouldn't feel removed from the fact that corporations are doing it and organizations across the country are doing it for adults. It should be happening for kids as well. They were already sort of isolated under the pandemic itself. And so this puts a whole nother layer on top of that isolation. And so I think the opportunity to get as many kids together on a conversation, on a Zoom, et cetera, to be able to express how they're feeling during this time and be ready with a list of maybe some resources that you think that they could go to for some education, or steal other people's resources. There's so many awesome lists out there right now. You can watch all the morning shows and get great lists from experts. The diversity and inclusion professionals are all over the place. So I think that, arming them with some tools of some things that might be age appropriate that they can watch or read or see, and offering the opportunity to have a follow-up conversation if that one conversation you don't think is enough for them. Yeah, but ignoring it is not useful at all.
Yeah, I agree. And piggybacking off of that, I would say start the conversation with you. You know what I mean? So oftentimes when discussions about race and racism, diversity and inclusion come up, it's always like outward looking. We're looking to judge and see what other groups are. I think a really powerful way to start is this is who I am. This is how I identify. I identify as a tall Black man from Trinidad and Tobago, which is where I'm originally from. And if you start the conversation in that way, you talk about the values you stand for, you talk about the diversity that you have externally, as well as some of the things that make you up internally. That's a really powerful way to begin a dialogue about the ways that people identify and, the things that we have in common and the things that we have that are different. Those, I think, soul-bearing conversations seem difficult, but in many ways they are the conversations that we have with friends as we kind of slowly peel back the layers over time. So it's about deliberately, intentionally saying, hey, let me do this now. Create that space and start with yourself. This is who I am. This is what I know. This is what I don't know. here are some questions I have for you. What might be some questions that you have? I think is an important way to start this.
And Marty, I would add one thing is just to think about the dose while you're doing this. One of the, in the same way that if you're trying to, get stronger, you don't go from lifting 5 pounds to lifting 200 pounds, right? You dose that, you go from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20, and in order to get stronger over time, I think it's really important that we check what we're able to what we're comfortable with, because if we go beyond where we're comfortable, then we become sort of overwhelmed by the stress of it, and then we aren't our best selves in response. So Nicole and Andrew have such great points about getting into the work and having the conversations and being vulnerable and doing seeking out resources. Do all of those things, and while you're doing it, watch how you respond to it, so that over time you become resilient. Because if not, then everybody's going to throw their hands up and say, I don't want to do this anymore, right? If we're not intentional about how we do this, then we're going to sort of burn ourselves out and not seek it out anymore.
Right. Absolutely. And the last thing I'll ask each of you to do is just to share one resource, maybe a book or article or film that you have found helpful over the last month that those tuning in right now can tap into.
Just one?
I'm gonna scoop. I'm gonna throw in two real quick. Yeah. So I feel like Ava DuVernay's 13th, which is a documentary that she actually did a couple of years ago, has really resurfaced for me, and something that I'm referring to other people. I think that if people are ready for conversation and they're ready to talk, that looking at the inequalities in Black history, and specifically the issues around the prison system and how many Black people are actually in the prison system and why, et cetera, would be very helpful. And then secondly, there is a video, and frankly, I think, Marty, I might have sent you the link. I don't even know the author because I've seen it in a couple different places. That is, it's referred to as equality, equal diversity, that I thought might be good for coaches, right? So I think everyone should watch this video, and because it specifically goes through the exercise of a coach saying to everyone there, regardless of color or whatever, I have $100 here, and we're going to see who gets to this $100. And he uses certain criteria to say, if you grew up in a house with a father, if you grew up in a whatever, if you grew up in a whatever. And at the end of the exercise, you see that all of the Black participants are still in the back, or they're behind all the white counterparts. And the message there is really around white privilege and how essentially whites have had a start. They have had a start. You're not starting from the same place. And I think that that's helpful in terms of just maybe an activity that a coach might want to practice, or just something he might want to think of when leading these conversations.
Great.
Yeah, there are two that stand out to me. So one is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. That book, I've read it a couple of times. I read it again recently. I think it's really a powerful read for people. I think it does, a similar job of 13th, because it covers or addresses the criminal justice system, but I think it does it through a very different lens that makes it emotional. I've looked at the film as well. I don't feel like the film does the same justice as the book itself. So I definitely suggest that people read the book for sure. And the other one, which may not be as popular in the US, but I know about it because of my Caribbean background, is Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Mass, which kind of looks at otherness. Because I think a lot of what we are dealing with right now is about minorities, Blacks, people of color feeling like the other. And so I think that's an important read as well going forward.
Thank you.
My two, all things Bryan Stevenson, so right on. And the second one that I would say is to all things Bruce Perry. So go to the Neurosequential Network, They've posted all kinds of really amazing resources over the last couple of months about the impact of stress, particularly on intergenerational trauma, Indigenous sovereignty, Black liberation, and the connection between mental health, the experience of stress and trauma in these populations. So a series of videos to watch and resources to gather, and incredible work being done.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We're going to be sending these resources out to everyone tuning in today. I want to pass it back over to Trinus so he can close us out.
Absolutely. I want to applaud all of our panelists. And I had a way that I was going to close, and I think that's been hijacked, and I'm okay with that. The two things I want to leave you with: number one, how you felt as whomever that was needed to join our call and say whatever they were saying. Imagine going to practice after that. Imagine going to a practice and having a coach yell at you, or something immediately happening after that, and what your reaction may or may not be, right? So we're adults, but that may not necessarily, as we think about what that means for trauma for kids, think about that, where that takes you, what that does for you. But most importantly, a hit, when you hit a nerve and when you're getting close to a situation, then people act out and they do certain things because they need to make sure that they're maintaining power. And I feel sad that happened, I'm almost prideful that happened, because I know that if we're heading in the right direction, we need to have those types of milestones sometimes that pop up. And I think the history of this country has proven that those situations will present themselves when you are heading in the right direction and you're taking away, especially racism. The people and the police officers that beat up John Lewis on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they weren't doing that because they randomly were there. They were doing that because they were gaining power, and their momentum in their movement was gaining power. When Confederate statues were put up in the 1950s because of the civil rights movement, it wasn't because they just decided to put up a statue. It's because they saw some movement happening, and they needed to make sure that something stopped, and that they needed to figure out how to stop those things to signify how they were feeling. When Laura Ingrams told Kevin Durant and LeBron James to shut up and dribble, that their opinion didn't matter, that they're good at playing basketball, but no one wants to hear their opinion, that showed that LeBron and KD were on the right direction. So I think that it's important that we recognize that there's trauma and sadness that someone feels that they need to take the moment out of their day to do that. However, I feel a sense of pride, the same pride that I feel when I decide to go and work out and I'm sore the next day, right? It doesn't make me feel good that I'm sore, but I know I did something to make me sore because I'm getting better. And I think that all of us have to think of it like that, and people will continue to try to harm or get in the way of the progress. But I just think that that's a sign that we're going in the right direction. So I'm really grateful for everybody joining us. We're going to continue to have these conversations. We're going to continue to try to drive forward and use PCA as a conduit. And we're super grateful to Megan and Dr. McIntosh and Nicole, or excuse me, Mrs. Bartlett, Dr. McIntosh, and Mrs. Whiteman. If I'm going to use it, if I'm going to use the professional part, I got to make sure that I'm using everybody's. But I'm thankful for everybody being here and having that conversation, and hopefully this is something that you can use to better yourself, and by way of that, better the kids that you're impacting.
Thank you.
So we'll see you on the next one. But we really appreciate you guys, and again, the references in the chat room have some of the resources, and we'll make sure we get those resources sent out for everybody to be able to reference. And we'll see you on the next conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trinus.
See you. Thank you.